Hi everyone, my name is Kudzie Mapiye and welcome to my channel. On this channel, I do videos about my life living here in Australia, and I also share different life lessons that I've learned along the way. And today I want to have a chat to you about mental health amongst African communities living overseas, and particularly what I've observed in African communities in Australia and from my own experience. And I feel like one of the things that affect the mental health of African communities is the way that we were brought up. I just think about my time living in Zimbabwe. I've been living in Australia for 14 years, and I came from Zimbabwe in 2008. And in that time, like, even the word mental health, I didn't even hear that word. I started hearing that word when I came here. The word mental health was not something that was discussed. And I feel like things have progressed over time, which is good. And I feel like people are more aware. But I feel like people who, you know, moved here like a long time ago probably were not as aware. And I started to just look back at my journey when I first moved to Australia, and I started to look at the things that I used to call different things. Like, I used to give it different labels. Like, I would say, oh, I was extremely homesick, and when I look back at it, I'm like, no, I was actually depressed. Like, and all these other words that we use to not really express, or maybe by not actually knowing the correct words to use to describe how we're feeling. And I just, was looking back at my own life and the things that I observed growing up, and I started to get some insights and explanations into why it's so hard sometimes for Africans to seek mental health assistance. And I just think back at times, for example, when I would attend a funeral and you would see the family that has just experienced the loss, and there will be in severe emotional distress. They will be very sad. They will be crying. They will be wailing. Like, they will be trying to express their emotions, and people would really rush in and, say, stop crying, like, be strong. And in Shona, they'll say, like, usacheme, shinga, like, don't express your emotions. But it always was very confusing to me that why would you tell someone who's expressing their emotions, and because they're feeling so hurt, like they're feeling so torn, why would you tell them to stop crying? And, I feel like sometimes as Africans, we find it hard to hold space for each other to express our emotions. Things like emotions are something that are so like uncomfortable for people to sit with. And when someone breaks down in front of you, I feel like the first instinct is to make them stop expressing their emotions, is to say something that will silence that emotion. And I don't think it's from a place of like ill intention. It's just not feeling equipped to deal with emotions, because it's not something that we were trained to do. It's not something that we spoke about. It's not something that we were taught. So, and I used to see it in myself. Like, if someone broke down in front of me or was telling me something that they were going through, I would try and make them feel good, or, try and just divert them from that emotion that they're feeling, because it was so uncomfortable for me to be able, like, to see someone expressing an emotion. Because for myself, I was so used to suppressing my own emotions and masking my own emotions, because I thought that was the honorable thing to do, and that was something that was expected. So I think the majority of my life, like a big chunk of my life, I spent really suppressing my emotions. And it was because I felt not really safe to express my emotions. I felt like, people could not contain my emotions. I didn't grow up observing people expressing their emotions and being encouraged to do so. It was always a shutdown. It was always, stop doing that, or, you're being weak, you're too sensitive. It was always some kind of label given on people trying to express their emotions. And I feel like moving overseas, moving to another country, and everything that comes with it, the culture shock, the adjustment, the sense of separation, a lot of people do experience depression. A lot of people do experience some kind of mental unwellness during that period, and they don't know how to seek services because they actually don't know how to communicate that they're not feeling okay. And another thing that is a factor in African communities is people think the moment you cross the seas, like you have just walked into heaven or into the land of milk and honey. They don't really understand that things are actually hard. There's an adjustment period. Like people are just like, oh, you're now overseas. Wow. Like, it's this, they paint this very rosy picture of being overseas and now you're okay. Your life is made. You have so many opportunities, but they don't really acknowledge that people who have moved overseas have actually left all their support, the whole support system that they had. They're starting a whole new life with people they don't know, in a community they just don't know how to navigate. And what happens in that case is your biggest support system, which is your family back home, don't offer you that emotional support because they really don't feel like you need it. They don't check up on you. They don't see how you're doing. They don't see how well you're adjusting. They just, if anything, they're just quick to ask for, money or something like, you're over there, things are good now, can you send us something? Or, they're quick to focus on everything else that is not that person's mental wellness. And I feel like African communities, because they don't have that support, they tend to struggle a little bit more when it comes to mental health. And it might be a surprise to some people because they're like, oh, I don't see any African people struggling from mental health. Well, that's because they don't actually talk about it. Africans are the most, when it comes to suppressing emotions and masking emotions, I feel like they are just top of the charts. Like they have been trained to do that. You'll see someone dressed well at work, performing, doing all those things, but they're actually mentally unwell because they just don't know how to express their emotions. And because of that, people think they're okay, but actually they're not. And I just wanted to really talk about how healthy it is to talk about how you're feeling. Like, if you don't talk about how you're feeling, you just learn to suppress your emotions, you learn to bury your emotions. And I say that is like corrosive. That is got the same like effect as something that is corrosive, something that eats away at you inside, like literally eats away at you. If you keep like emotional distress inside, those things are not supposed to be kept inside the body. They're supposed to be expressed. And there are people who are trained to actually deal with those situations. There are people like counselors, people like doctors, people like psychologists who are all there trained to help people to navigate their, mental state and to be mentally well. And I feel like for myself, I experienced several periods like here and there while I tried to adjust to life in Australia, life in a different country. I definitely experienced periods of depression, but I didn't name it that because I just didn't know what depression was. And I didn't even know how to identify the signs in myself that, hey, I might actually be depressed. It's only when I started, like after that period had passed, and I started getting more information, like reading more about it. I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly what I was going through during that time. Like, and I had no idea. And it's something that's really, really it's heartbreaking to know that you were in such mental distress and you didn't even reach out for help. And what I have done for myself is I have actually revisited those periods in my life where I was not mentally well and kind of just debriefed it, like look at, okay, what was going on? What did I need during that time? Because I feel like even if a period has passed, you can always revisit it because sometimes those issues have not been healed and there's still some kind of like remnants of whatever happened during that period that you still carry with you. So it's always good to get support, to look back in those situations and look at what you could have done or what you needed or what you were actually experiencing. And the most important thing, I think, is to just give voice to how you feel. Talk about it, find words to express how you feel. Even though like we grew up maybe in an environment that we're not given the vocabulary to describe emotions, it's good to just not say I'm stressed, because I feel like in Zimbabwe, the word that I heard the most was stress. Oh, I'm stressed at work. I'm stressed. It was always the word stress, not the word depressed, not the word anxious, not the word overwhelmed. Like there was very little like language used to describe those mental experiences. And I feel like that was one of the barriers to seeking assistance. If you can't verbalize, if you can't say what you're feeling, it's hard for people to give you the tools or the assistance that you need, because they actually don't know what's going on with you. So it's really good to be aware, like get educated into mental health, evaluate your own life, look at periods where you might have been experiencing mental unwellness, and just be on top of that. And then if you do that, you can then recognize if those signs show up again later in your life, because you now know the signs. And people are different. Mental unwellness manifests differently for different people. For someone, it might be you just start crying a lot. Or for some people, you might just start being very withdrawn. For some people, you might start doing, just being disconnected from your relationships, from your family, from your friends, all those kind of things. It's different for different people. So have a look at yourself and the signs that you know that something is not right with you. And then when you know the signs, know what to do as well. Like, know where to go, know who to talk to. Because another barrier I think in the African community is people don't know who to trust. And I think there's some background behind that, because sometimes people have expressed themselves and how they felt to someone, and that person has betrayed their confidence, and they have divulged that information to somebody else without that person's consent. And that person has been scarred by it. And that's something that happens a lot. And so people tend to keep things inside. They don't want to tell anyone because they don't want their secrets to go to the whole world. And that's another barrier I see in the African community for expressing how you're feeling. People have a lack of trust. And then the other barrier is people feel like, okay, even if I go to a psychologist, this person is from a whole different culture, they're a whole different race. They might not understand the unique challenges that I have as an African, and things that, might have some kind of cultural background, and I feel like I'm not getting their assistance. I feel like they're not hearing me. And I think that's another barrier that exists, because not everyone is culturally aware, not everyone is culturally sensitive, and they might not understand like maybe the financial pressures that you have. They might not understand the family stresses that are unique to Africans that you might have. So it might be hard for that person to really help you, and it might be hard for you to feel heard. So I feel like to navigate that, we really need to be conscious amongst ourselves as Africans living overseas, to be support systems to people, like to really see that, if someone comes to you with a problem, the solution is not to tell that problem to somebody else, because the problem still exists unresolved. If someone comes to you with a problem and you don't know what to do, the best thing to do is to really tell that person and be honest. You know what, this problem, I really don't know what to do, but how about we find solutions together? Or how about we talk more about it? And sometimes just, talking a little bit more about it can actually help someone feel better, and finding solutions together, or checking in on them, asking them what they need, asking them how they want you, they want you to show up for them. Because for some people, it just might be like, hey, I just want you to be there for me to chat, or I just want this, or I just want that. And maybe just getting those few support things from you, they might feel better. But I think the most important thing is to know that we have a responsibility towards each other to really not divulge sensitive information, because it really creates a mental health problem in our community where people don't feel safe to speak. And if we continuously do those things, we'll continuously be having people in, mental unwellness, mental health distress, like mental health crisis, and they just suffer on their own, because they feel like if they reach out to their brother is going to betray them. So I think that is such a sad reality, but something that does really happen amongst African communities overseas. And I know it's like a taboo topic, people don't talk about it, but it's something that is eating away at our community. We should really learn to be, supportive of each other. And also another thing, it's be supportive of each other, and also, you know, be courageous enough to reach out and to reach, you know, there. And I know there are, it could be that cultural barrier where you feel like you are seeing someone who is not aware of your culture and they don't really understand what you're going through. There are some Africans that I know that are in mental health that are very good at helping people, and it's good. You can actually search like maybe Africans psychologist or something, like try and find someone who will understand your unique situation. And if someone is a professional, I mean, they are bound by other, you know, ethics that they're most likely not going to betray your confidence. And if they do, well, that would be very disappointing. And again, it's a responsibility we owe ourselves as Africans living overseas to learn to keep people's private information private unless they give us the permission to divulge that information. So I feel like those are some of the barriers that African communities face when it comes to mental health. And some tools that I have used personally, and I feel like I would love to share with, you know, other Africans living overseas or anywhere in the world, even in Africa, that might be experiencing some mental health problems and they want some tools to be able to like help themselves in if they're not feeling mentally well. And one of those things is to invest in your joy, like invest in things that make you feel good. And this is in a irresponsible way. Like don't invest in your joy in a way of like you now don't have money for rent because you're spending time finding joy, stuff like that. Like be responsible, set money aside. Like for myself, I have a separate account for my joy and it's named accordingly, and I know that everything that goes into that account is for my mental wellness. It's things that I use to get a massage, to buy stuff that makes me feel good, to really just splurge on myself. And it's an investment that I make in myself because I value my mental wellness and I know how it is to be mentally unwell, and I don't want to feel like that. So I proactively create those structures so that I can have something that I can lean on to make me feel good. And sometimes even utilizing your days off. I feel like people feel like sick days at work are only for physical illnesses. Like if you have a flu or you've got a cold or a broken leg, like sick days are also for mental wellness. Like you can take a sick day if you're not feeling mentally well, and you know, you can take time to yourself to go and do something to get you back in balance. That could be, even for me, I do things that don't cost money sometimes for me to feel mentally well. It can be going for a walk. It could be like watching a few positive videos that will make me feel good. It could be even just taking time to clean my house or do something that just makes me feel good, and that it's like a reward for me. And those things are also investments into your mental health. So really identify for yourself what you need to feel mentally well, invest in those things, make sure those things are always in reach, and you have like a mental health toolkit. You know how people have like a flood box or flood toolkit with food and spare clothes and blankets, something they can pick up and go in case of emergency. You should have the same for your mental health. Have a toolkit of things that you can pick up and use in case of a mental health emergency, so that you're always on top of your mental health, and you know that you have actually taking time to think about it. You don't have to wait until you're in crisis to develop a toolkit. You can have things, take time to yourself, just dig in, look at yourself, evaluate, look at things that you think that you might need to be able to, feel mentally well. And another thing is, one thing that I just want to end with is, it's not weak to express your emotions. It is very, very courageous to actually talk about how you feel, because people just think it's weakness, especially amongst men. And I feel like African men actually have more mental health problems than women, because they suppress a whole lot more, because they don't want to be labeled as weak, to go to another person and say, hey, I'm not feeling okay. It is courageous. It is actually very brave to do those things. And it's something that, people should do more regularly. And I would love to see where people, feel more, safe to express their emotions, and there are within our community people who can offer those support systems for people to feel mentally well. So yes, guys, if you're in Africa and you have relatives overseas, they go through a lot. They're balancing a lot, and it's always good to reach out, not just to ask for something or to, to just talk about good things. It's also good to just reach out and say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's life going for you? Because people really do miss that. And they had that when they were back home. And when they moved here, people just thought, hey, they're fine. They're now in the land of milk and honey. That is not always the case. Let's be there for each other. Let's support each other and make sure that we're feeling mentally well. See you in the next video.